I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this is Outside My Window. Our guest on this episode is Tim Vallillee. Now, Tim spent a life never wasting a moment, and he filled it with photography, singing and songwriting, performing for children of all ages as a clown and a magician. He's fronted some of Nova Scotia's most popular bands in the Annapolis Valley, and he even performed as Elvis Presley. Tim is living proof that faith, persistence, passion, stubbornness, and support is what you need to succeed in any aspect of your life. His greatest achievement was to grow old enough to enjoy life with his wife Agatha and beautiful son Isaiah. It would not have been possible without support of his family, but also because of the invention of the cystic fibrosis gene modulating drugs Kalydeco and Trikafta. Tim's life has never been the same. Now, he says, the sky's the limit. Tim, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, you've suffered with CF for, most of your life, 50-odd years. Do you remember when you were first diagnosed?
Well, I don't remember it myself, but I was only 7 months old, and the really interesting way that it even showed up is that from infancy, I was really, really sick, and my mom and dad couldn't figure out what the heck was going on with me. And, went to see one doctor after another. And my mom happened to mention in front of the right doctor that whenever she kissed me on the forehead, I tasted salty. Now, if you know anything about cystic fibrosis, it's the way you test for CF is through a sweat test. And there's this elevated level of salt in the system. So when my mom mentioned that she could taste the salt on my forehead, it was an automatic red alarm that went off with my doctor. His name was Dr. Gillespie, and he ended up being my doctor till I was 22 years old. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know how many years would have went by that I would have been fighting to stay alive. But thank God he was around, and my mom said it to the right man, and we immediately got a treatment for CF back in 1968. Yep, it's been a long time, and I'm really, really very lucky to even be alive at 54 now.
So back at those days, what else would they have come up with?
What else would they have had for a diagnosis?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? A lot of people get it mixed up with asthma. They thought, oh, there's a breathing problem. But CF is not just in the lungs. It's also in the digestive system. So there wasn't a lot known back then. The biggest heartache was that if you had a child with CF in the 60s, chances are that kid would not live to see 2 years old. And that's, you can imagine it was very, very difficult for a young mom and dad to hear that. I have two older siblings, and then I came along. My older siblings were healthy as can be. I came along, and I'm pretty darn sick right from the get-go. So it was a very difficult diagnosis to hear. But my doctor had told my mom the very day that she brought me in to get this diagnosis, he said, whatever you do, don't read the Chronicle Herald newspaper tomorrow. There's a story on cystic fibrosis, but don't read it. Of course, the paper comes the next day, and my mom reads the story. And it was a very depressing story about how lethal cystic fibrosis was back in those days. So, of course, that put my parents kind of in a tailspin as to what are we going to do? We don't want to lose our baby. So, again, thank God I've had the same doctor for the first 22 years of my life. And if it wasn't for him and my parents and, lots of supporting people, I wouldn't have made it to even 5 years old. But I kept on having milestones. I turned 5, I turned 10. I was able to get my driver's license at 16 and hear it all the time. I didn't think I'd live to be that old. And I just kept on keeping up.
So what were the treatment options available in late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, great question, because it's funny, if you get diagnosed with CF now, you don't actually go through the same regimen that I did as a kid. But to give you an example, I had to take pills every time I had a meal because in CF, the digestive system doesn't work, so to speak. Our pancreas stopped growing while you're in the womb. So your pancreas creates all the chemicals that break down your food. So there was a drug which mirrored those enzymes that I should have naturally created. So, but of course, when you're young, you can't swallow pills. So my mom, for the first probably 3 or 4 years of my life, had to crush my pills into applesauce. So I'm not a fan of applesauce anymore because I've had so much applesauce.
I can well imagine.
So Yeah, so that was just to get it into my system. So I took lots of medication. I had to do 3 or 4 aerosol masks every day of my life to, keep the fluid moving in my lungs. Because if you don't keep it moving, it gets very stuck, and it's very difficult to get it out. So also with that, my parents used to pound my chest and my back for physiotherapy. And that always shocked people to see my mom and dad beating the crap out of me, so to speak. But it was a medical procedure. And that, again, loosened up the mucus in my lungs so I could spit it out, so I could have room for air in my lungs. And I also, at nighttime, I slept, it's like a tent over my bed. There was a clear plastic tent hooked up to a machine which created a medical mist. There was a machine outside the tent. A tube would go into the tent, and I would breathe this stuff every single night so that I could, see the morning. So that was the basic regimen for somebody with CF back then. But those regimens have changed a little bit now because there's new medical devices that can help you really loosen up your lungs. But I still do the aerosol mask every day. I still take pills every day when I eat, because that part won't ever change.
So going through your childhood, I mean, kids are mean. I don't mean that in a, generic, every kid is mean kind of thing, but kids are mean. So you weren't doing any sports. You were probably one of the geeky nerds in the class, as I was.
Yep.
What did you do in order to try to fit in?
Well, I had never really, from what I remember, I never really had a problem of showing that, I was a little different, and that, when I went to school, I had to take lots of medicine, which I never hid. Some people growing up with illnesses hide all the stuff that they do. I never did. And when I was in about grade 3, we had moved from one area to another, and my mom, came to school one day and saw me kind of sitting out in the corner by myself in the playground while everybody else was playing. And it was a new space, and I didn't have a lot of friends yet. And one of the things my mom actually thought of, what, to help Tim fit in, let's talk about CF. So she actually organized this little speech in the gymnasium in front of, the 100 kids that were in my school to share what I do. And it really was kind of a turning point when it came to, although I wasn't really ever bullied so much. I was always called the little guy and the small guy, and little Tim, tiny Tim. I've always gotten all those nicknames, but they never really bothered me because that's just who I was. But when we did this little demo to talk about CF, it really opened some eyes, and it helped with other kids just having questions rather than, pointing at you and go, that's the different kid. Why is he taking all these pills? All that kind of stuff. So it was really a great little turning point to show people that, we're not all the same. Some of us deal with different things. And I really thank my mom for doing it back then.
So how did the other kids, act around you? Children can be mean sometimes as well. What was that whole environment like for you, Tim?
Honestly, Gary, it wasn't really bad at all. I don't really have any really bad memories of kids bullying me, so to speak. I was always just very upfront. Like, yeah, so I have cystic fibrosis, and this is what I do. And if you don't like it, well, then you don't have to be my friend. It's pretty much, I've just always been that straight up kind of guy, and try not to let people bother me, because it's just, I know it's mostly just ignorance of not knowing what I'm dealing with.
You don't seem like a person who is one to feel sorry for oneself, but, through all of this, were there days that you thought, why me?
Oh, absolutely. That's an ongoing thing all lifelong. Like, I have lost so many friends, I can't even count them on both hands and feet. The number of friends with CF I've had over my lifetime who have died throughout my lifetime. And I keep wondering, why am I still here? Why am I still here? That's the hardest part. And so when you get to, like, I'm 54 years old, and I do have some survivor guilt because I've had so many younger people pass away from CF, and why am I still kicking around? And I know it's probably even a question that other cystic parents have about when they've lost a child. And why is Tim still here? Why, so that plays in your head a lot, but I can't dwell on that stuff, because for whatever reason, I am still here. And I'm trying to make the best of my life. I'm the kind of guy that lives for every moment and every day. I don't plan way, way ahead of time. It's funny. I was joking with a friend of mine the other night. We were talking about jobs and careers, and they were about to retire and do their pension. And I remember when I was in my 20s, starting my first big job, there's an option to sign up for RRSPs and all that stuff. And I thought, well, I'm not, because I'm not going to live to be probably even 30. So you have a different perspective altogether when it comes to those things. And now here I am at 54 thinking, oh, if I'd only saved that RRSP way back then, but I never did.
So as you grew into adulthood, you fell in love, married, had a son. So when was the point in that stage of your life that you had to sit down with your son and explain that you had CF and how it affected you, that, maybe Dad, can't go out and throw the ball for long periods of time or what have you? How did that transition? Yeah.
That's a great question too, Gary. I think it was just a very general transition as he got older and realized all these things I do. And he's always been involved with CF fundraisers. Even his very first CF walk was in the ballpark off William Street behind Huskisson's Funeral Home. I have a great little picture of when he was, I think, 3 years old, and he walked that track all by himself. So he's always been very aware of what cystic fibrosis is, that Mom and Dad are always trying to raise money for research. And so I think it's just a gradual knowledge came along. But you're right. For me, the thing was I could never keep up with my boy when he was young like other dads could. And so that was very heartbreaking. And when he was born, I thought, I'm not going to probably see him get out of high school, but I'm going to really enjoy this boy while we're here together. And up until 2014, now he would have only been 7 years old by then, but in 2014 is when I started the first major cystic fibrosis medication called Kalydeco. So up to that point, I had a pretty dismal outlook for my relationship with my son and my wife, that it was very, very limited because I was not in very good shape when I started this medication. And, we can go on about this medication some more, but the incredible change in my body only after a few weeks of starting this medication was profound. My lung function jumped nearly 20%, and I was down at the low 30 percentile range. And all of a sudden, I could keep up with my kid. Now, that Isaiah can run like a son of a gun, but I couldn't run like a son of a gun. For a 7-year-old boy, he could always outrun me. I was never very good at tag with him because he could avoid me like crazy. Because, when you have cystic fibrosis and you're in 30 percentile lung range, you don't have a lot of energy and you're constantly coughing. You have to stop and you have to stop just to catch your breath. Well, once I started this medication, within weeks, I didn't have to stop, and I could finally catch that boy when he tried to run away from me, in a soccer field or something. So that was a pretty amazing feeling to go, oh my God, I feel like a normal dad now.
Just to clarify for those of us in the cheap seats here, is CF hereditary, genetic? How does that sort of come into play?
No, great question. So it is a genetic thing. You can't catch cystic fibrosis. Both parents have to be a carrier of the CF gene. And if both parents get together, they have to know that there's a 1 in 4 chance of having a child with CF. Now, you may not have a child with CF at all, but chances are that you can probably have a child with CF. You might have all kids with CF. I know families that they have 2 and 3 children, and they all have cystic fibrosis. In my family, I have 2 older siblings that don't have CF, but I'm pretty sure they're carriers of cystic fibrosis. So it's very genetic, and like I said, you can't catch it, which is great because a lot of people, without their knowledge, they think that when you're around a cystic that you're going to catch it, but it's absolutely not possible to catch cystic fibrosis.
Now, with COVID being a respiratory disease, that must have been a bit of a knock on the door for you too, right?
Oh yes, I was terrified. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die if I get this thing. So I had some very wonderful friends when COVID first came out that helped me with my wife's encouragement. She had said, "You need to hide. You need to get off the grid. You need to get away from the population." And I had some friends out in Lake Annis, in Yarmouth County, who offered up their cottage for me to stay for 3 or 4 months while at the time we thought, is this thing going to pass or what? But I knew that I had to get out of the city. I live in Halifax, and I was terrified because of the population density here that I was going to catch COVID and it would kill me, because we didn't really know what the heck COVID was all about, and people were dying left, right, and center. So the fact that I was able to escape and just hide out in the country, probably, well, it saved my life, but eventually I ended up actually getting COVID, not during that stay. It was only here last April that I got COVID, and I thought, oh my God, it's going to kill me. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to die on COVID, but it actually did not affect me as bad as I thought it would. Most times when I catch a cold, it goes from my head to my throat to my chest, and then I'm in trouble. And when I got COVID, it only went to my throat, and it didn't affect my lungs at all, which I could not believe. But that's when I, say, well, pats on the back for the folks who designed the vaccines and the booster shot, because I think that's probably what saved me.
You talked earlier about hitting the milestones. So what were the expectations when you were younger? Were they saying, you'll be lucky to make 20, or you'd be lucky to make 25? So then you start hitting your 15s, your 20s, your 25s. At what point are you saying to yourself, the doctors don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm doing fine.
Yeah, no, I never felt like they didn't know what they were talking about. And I wasn't really doing fine in my teens, my 20s. I was surviving. That's probably the better word. I was just surviving. And but what always broke my heart is, the CF Foundation would have some pretty dismal commercials on television, but they were supposed to be impacting. But as a cystic, it's very hard to watch those commercials. But I go back to my parents and my doctor for putting the right stuff in me, into believing that I could achieve anything, that I could live as long as I want. I also had to be very stubborn and dedicated to my treatment. And I didn't believe the statistics. And I think that was probably one of my big saviors. The other big thing was that when I was 17, I started to sing. And you use a lot of air when you sing. So I've always used singing as my barometer for my health. Because when I can't hit a certain note, I know there's something going on. It could be very subtle, but I know how I can sing. I know what I'm able to do. And if I can't hit a certain note, like I said, it's a barometer. I'm like, okay, something's up. And sure enough, within a few days, I could have a lung infection or something. But if I noticed it early enough, I could get extra treatment and try to avoid getting an infection, so to speak. So, yeah, it's I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but I've always just have a very, very positive outlook on life, and that you can achieve anything. And I just didn't believe in the statistics, and I really did take very good care of my health. And I can't preach it enough for other cystics you are not, quote unquote, a normal person. You are different. And if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do, then you are going to get in trouble.
Well, definitely that's a great message for people that have CF. What's the message that you have for people that don't?
Well, it's pretty much the same message. I live every day like this could be my last one. I truly do. Not in a negative way. I just try to fulfill my life as much as I can. So we all deal with stuff, whether we have cancer, you got diabetes, or you're having a bad hair day. And you have to put your problems into perspective. I'm not saying my problems are any worse than anybody else. I know how to deal with mine, and thank God there's some great medication and treatments out there for CF, but it's still a very deadly illness. And people, even regardless of these new drugs coming out, people still die of cystic fibrosis. And that's just the plain truth. But so like I said, I live every moment like it could be my last one. I could walk out the door and get hit by a bus. Everybody knows that expression, but it's absolutely true. Life can change in an instant. So live it up while you've got it. Yeah, if you don't have an illness, great. You have a different perspective, but I try to keep everybody on the same perspective as if you are going to catch something or be the victim of some illness, because life can change. I remember being in a bar one time when I used to play music, and I noticed one of my friends of mine who was a little bit heavy set, and I said to her, "Why aren't you up dancing?" She's like, "Oh, I'm worried that people are going to laugh at me and point at me," and she was embarrassed to dance. And I said, "Well, how about this? Next week, I'm going to pretend to foreshadow. Next week, you're in a car crash, and you lose the use of your legs, and you're going to sit there and say, 'Why didn't I go dancing last week?'" And it really chimed into her brain. So she got right up and she hit the dance floor. And no, she didn't end up in a car crash, thank God. But that's the kind of stuff I like to switch up in people's brains. Like, you've got one life, live it. Don't worry about what other people say. You live it for you.
Tim, you're a multi-talented performer. How has that, your singing, songwriting, whether it's your magic shows, how has that helped you, kind of deal with living with CF, and are you able to use that talent to sort of reach out and spread the message?
Oh, absolutely. Like, especially when I'm singing, I have a very powerful singing voice, and it always surprises people when they realize that I have cystic fibrosis. And I remember being in it was a fundraiser for CF one time, and I was singing with my friend, and a woman had come up to talk to me afterwards. She's like, "Somebody said you were Tim Vallillee up on that stage," and I couldn't believe it, because no cystic can sing like you do. And I thought, there's no way this guy has CF. And then she said, "But when you got off the stage, you coughed." And I knew that was the CF cough, but she could not believe that I could sing as well as I did. And I thought that was really funny, but she was a CF mom, so she recognized the classic CF cough. But again, it opens an opportunity for me to talk about CF and to really show that, again, you can achieve anything you want. I wanted to be a singer. I became a singer. I wasn't very good at first, but with practice, I got better and better. And I've used my talent for multiple cystic fibrosis fundraisers in the past 50 years. From doing magic to music to balloon animals, you name it. I've done it all, and I've never been scared to talk about my illness to anybody who wants to ask questions, because it's just the more people know, the more people know.
So let's take a step into the world of pharma. And so you've benefited from these new drugs that have been coming out, but there's a lot of folks that are looking at the price tag and going, I can't do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, these drugs are incredibly expensive, into the $350,000 range per person per year. And when these drugs first came out, we thought, oh, the government's going to cover it instantly, because they came out in the United States, and within a week, every single cystic in the country received the first round of drugs, which was called Kalydeco. And I was a beneficiary of, I benefited from Kalydeco when it first came out. However, it was a nearly 2.5-year battle to get that drug approved in Canada, because it didn't get approved federally, which broke our hearts. And here was this amazing drug sitting on a shelf that we could not access. And you got to remember, while we're waiting for this, people with CF are dying that would not have died if it wasn't for this drug. But my wife and I, and a slew of CF, the parents and siblings, started an advocacy group to try to get the government to realize how important it was to approve these drugs. And yes, the price tag was ridiculous, but there's got to be a way to get this thing covered. They cover ridiculous other things, but this was a life-changing, life-extending drug, and we weren't going to take no for an answer. So at the time, we had Leo Glavine was the health minister in Nova Scotia. This is back in 2012, 2013, 2014. And he worked very, very hard to get Kalydeco approved in Nova Scotia. And he took a couple racks on the knuckles from his own party for stepping up and saying, we need to approve this thing. But through his work and the work of our advocacy team, we finally influenced the government that this drug was worthy of paying for. But people don't realize how a drug comes into Canada. There are multiple review boards that a drug has to be approved before it even gets into our hands. So that's where the big stall really happens. And it's like jumping through hoops of fire. And you have to, along the way, educate all these review boards what cystic fibrosis is, the results that this drug can cause. So what are the benefits? What are the cons? And then they have to balance out if it's worth paying for it for these lives. But of course, most intelligent people will say, whatever the price tag, it is worth covering. So anyway, it was a very frustrating battle for 2.5 years to get Kalydeco approved in Nova Scotia, but it finally did. And that original drug, like I said, I received it in 2014. That was a very small group of people that, CF people, that drug could actually help. Meaning only about 3% of the CF population that drug could work on, because it was it dealt with a very specific mutation of CF, because there are 1,900 mutations of CF. And I just, at the time, happened to have the right mutation on CF to receive that drug. And when I got it, oh my God, my life changed virtually overnight. I overnight stopped coughing. This is how fast this drug worked. I could not believe that the next day that I could actually talk without coughing, because it was just a regular thing. You'd cough every 3 or 4 words. That's just what CF was. And within weeks, my lung function jumped nearly 20%, which was mind-boggling to think that this was actually working. And you still have doubts. You know, when my whole life I always wished upon a star, right? 2 coins in a wishing well. Or, you know, every time it was 11:11, I'd make a wish. And the wish was always the same since I was a little kid. And it was, I wish in my lifetime that we could see a major breakthrough for CF, even if it didn't help me, because I thought I'm going to be too old for it to work on. But could there just be one major thing before I die to know that we're on the right track? And lo and behold, in 2014, I received the miracle drug that I've been always wishing for. So it was very, very humbling, and it was a very happy moment indeed.
So with this, you mentioned it only works on a certain percentage of those that have CF. So with Trikafta, is that the same sort of thing, or is that more of a generic, it works for everybody kind of thing?
Yeah, so Trikafta is kind of like the new and improved turbo version of the original. And the exciting thing is that Trikafta, unlike Kalydeco, Trikafta covers 93% of the cystics in worldwide. So the impact it's almost across the board, and it's an even better drug than the first one that I got. And I'm seeing lots of my friends with CF receive this drug, and they cannot believe the results. They're jumping 30 and 40% lung function, which is unreal to think that that's actually a thing. But one of my best friends in Ontario just started it about a week or 2 ago, and she went from low 60 percentile, I think, to 88% of her lung function. That's just in the first few weeks. Some people are exceeding 100% lung function. I don't know how that works, but they are actually getting more in their lungs than physically possible, but they are. So, you know, the thing I want people to understand out there in the world is that if you have faith in something, don't ever give up. If you want to make change, yes, it costs money. There are some incredibly smart scientists in some lab somewhere that are designing these things. And it all started out way back in, I think it was 1986, when a doctor named Dr. Lap Chi Choi, he had discovered the CF gene. That was the biggest turning point, because to find out where a defective gene is that causes CF, well, then you can start studying how to reverse it. And this is kind of what these medications do. They don't actually reverse CF, but they stop again, I'm not a scientist, so my wording is not the best, but they kind of stop what CF does, and it lowers the chloride level in your body, which affects the lungs and all the other organs. So the fact that he had discovered this gene back in 1986 was exactly the turning point to getting where we are today. And I will remember that day. We were doing a Coke Castle in I think it was the Zellers parking lot at the mall way back then, and word came down that this guy had discovered the gene, and it was a monumental moment. I remember crying my eyes out when my mom told me, because I knew that this was the beginning of something exciting.
Tim, beyond the frustration that you mentioned of going through that whole process, and you were talking about that, and I was thinking, how did that affect you on a more deeper human level? As a human being, you're suffering from a terrible disease, and having to wait for a government to decide whether or not they're going to spend a little bit of money to make these drugs available. So how did that affect you deeply?
It's a great question, Gary, because it's incredibly frustrating. The story of the donkey with the carrot hanging in front of his face, and he keeps walking and walking and walking, hoping to get that carrot. And that's kind of how we felt. It was heartbreaking, honestly. I lost two of my close friends. Everybody in Yarmouth knows Ryan Stonier, and that man should be alive today, in my opinion. And we lost another beautiful soul named Chantel Lindsay from the Truro area. Right when this new drug was out, it was available, and if she got it, she would have not died, but she died waiting for it. So that part's that's the hardest part is watching people die when that carrot is right there. But, again, it comes down to the pharmacies and the government and these review boards, and something has to be changed because there's absolutely no reason why these people should have died, why any cystic should have to wait. So they're the real angels in the story, but it doesn't change the sadness. And there was a lot of doubt whether this drug would even work on me. Thank God it did, but it leaves a lot of sorrow when you're trying so hard to get this thing into the hands of the cystics, and they're dying as they wait. So I could go on very angry, but I'm not an angry person. But it's incredibly heartbreaking. Just ask any of those people's parents how they feel, and they feel completely helpless, and they're at the hands of the government and the pharmacy companies and these review boards. And like I said, something has to change in that level, because I don't care if it takes a few months to get the money deals done behind the scenes. When these drugs come out, they should be available immediately, and because every life is precious, and none of these people should have died in the waiting game. But sadly, they did. But their legacy won't go unnoticed. The fact that they've sacrificed their life is probably part of their story has helped get these drugs onto the shelves and into the hands of CFers probably a lot faster than maybe they would have if it was just something like Tylenol, which people could wait for.
Are others able to piggyback onto your efforts, or are you able to piggyback on other people's efforts in being able to get drugs approved for other diseases? I mean, obviously CF is one thing, but, certainly there's new cancer drugs being announced every now and again, and other diseases that can benefit from this sort of activity.
It's funny, when this first all started, I didn't know how the drug system worked. I grew up knowing that whatever I needed for my CF medication, I got. It was always covered by MSI. And that's been great. And then all of a sudden, I never for the life of me thought that once the miracle drug came out, that we would have to fight for it. This is the biggest heartbreak besides my friends dying. But I thought, why? This is a no-brainer. Why can't I have it? What do you mean I have to wait? What do you mean it's not available? It's sitting on a shelf. You spend $1 billion to design this thing. We're all here waiting for something. You're not going to give it to me because there's a price tag to deal with. There's a review board to deal with. So we had to learn how the system even worked. And through the system, we had to teach some of the people that were already in the system what CF was all about and why it was so crucial to not take time or take so much time to get this drug approved. 2 years to get a drug into my hands was ridiculously heartbreaking. And all the while hoping that I'm going to live long enough to receive this drug to save me. So anybody who's dealing with, maybe a similar situation, whether it's cancer or you name it, whatever, maybe there's a medication for MS out there and it's still hung up in all the red tape. Well, they can give me a call and I will be more than happy to share what I know, because there's so many levels that you need to understand how it works before you'll ever get it. And again, it was just my own ignorance. I had no idea what we were facing to get this drug approved. But thankfully, like I said, Leo Glavine was the health minister on my first drug. And thank God, once again, Zach Churchill was the health minister when this new drug, Trikafta, was coming out. So I give 98.9% of the credit to getting Trikafta into Nova Scotian hands to Zach Churchill, because he worked the 2D off to get this thing on the docket, so to speak. And one of his best friends was Ryan Saunier from the Army. So, when he spoke at Ryan's memorial, it was palpable that this was not just some political thing for him. It actually meant something to him. And it meant the same thing to Leo Glavine, because he used to be a high school teacher in the Valley, and he had lost a student to CF when he was teaching. So that was very predominant in his heart. And thank God these guys had real CF connections, because I'm not a big fan of politics. I really am not. But when you have somebody in your corner who knows what you're talking about, it is very easy and effortless for them to do what they need to do in their political position. And that's why I'm so grateful for Zach to going up to bat for us. Unfortunately, an election was called when we were so close to getting Trikafta approved, and his party lost power. But at least the Honorable Michelle Thompson had taken over. And within 3 or 4 months, we finally did get approval for Trikafta in Nova Scotia. But I know that also behind the scenes, Zach was working with her to get it approved, because this is something that should not have taken 2 years. But again, it did, because of all the political bureaucracy and the review board bureaucracy. So I'm more than happy to share my knowledge of that world with people if they have questions.
So, Tim, there's power in numbers. What can we do to help affect some positive change?
Again, man, you got all the good questions. You can be a member of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. There are chapters in Nova Scotia. There are chapters for CF Canada all across the country. So you can get involved. You can show up at fundraiser events. You can donate money. We need as many people to make some noise, and for whether it's CF or any other group. I always say to people that if it wasn't for people like you, there wouldn't be people like me. When I do lots of motivational speaking, and I always mention that important statement, because it's absolutely true. Whether you can put 25 cents into a donation jar, or you can buy a $500 plate for a big corporate, fundraiser event, then great. Do what you can. Just don't do nothing, because you never know how life is going to hit you. Again, my life is all about cystic fibrosis. There's lots of other illnesses out there. There's, the SPCA, whatever you believe in, just do something. Don't just do nothing. There's some incredible people out there that really make change. In the CF world, we have scientists working day and night trying to develop even better treatments than these two amazing miracle drugs that are out. But you can show up at a CF event. You can go online. You can make a donation. There's nothing you can't do. So don't be shy. Every single cent counts, and knowledge is also important. That's why I try to talk about CF as much as I can. It's not always this dreary thing. We are at a point in our CF life that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But here I am, the recipient of 2 miracle drugs. So I'm living in happy land. I really, really am. And I'm enjoying everything that I've been able to do. The first year when I received the first drug, my lung function in my life improved so dramatically that I walked Cape Split 5 times that summer without really taking it. I didn't have to sit down. Where before I might have done Cape Split once every 5 years, and it would take me a long time. If you don't know what Cape Split is, if you look at the Nova Scotia map, it's the Hook, and it's about a 6-hour hike, 3 hours in, 3 hours out through the forest, and it's mostly uphill. So for me to achieve that and do it 5 times in one summer was unbelievable for someone with cystic fibrosis. It was so weird to feel the muscles in my legs for the first time really in my life. I didn't realize how little oxygen saturation I was getting in my body until I started these drugs. And I even went snowboarding for the first time in my life when I was 45 years old. because I grew up never to being able to do sports because my lungs basically wouldn't allow me to do it because I'd just be winded all the time. So it's quite an achieving feeling. So everybody in my life and my past who've ever put $1 in the donation jar for CF has saved my life. So that doesn't go unappreciated, believe me.
Is there anything new on the horizon right now?
I've heard rumblings of a new medication coming up, but I don't know much about it. What is exciting though is just recently, prior to about a week or two ago, Trikafta was only available for people, I think, 12 and over. And there was, a big waiting game for, everybody under 12, or maybe it was 10 years, I can't remember. But imagine you have a child with cystic fibrosis. There's these major miracle drugs out, and your kid, because they're under 10 or 12, they can't have it. Well, they've just recently announced that children over the age of 6 and up are now able to take Trikafta, which is so, so good, because in the youth of children with CF, that's where most of the damage in the lungs happens. So the younger we can get these drugs into the bodies of CFers, the healthier they're going to have a whole life. Where for me, I had lung damage my whole life till I was 45 years old. So these drugs will only work so good on me. But for children to get on these drugs as young as possible, that's where the major change is going to be. And they will live a pretty darn normal life and probably not go through the nightmares of sick days that I've gone through. And, I accept that. There was no miracle drug when I was a kid, but at least there was some medications that sustained my life, and I worked very hard to stay healthy. At least these kids now will not have a lifetime of lung damage by the time they're 50. So that's exciting.
Tim, you are an inspiration, a pleasure to talk to, and thank you so much.
You're very welcome, guys. Anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Feel free to chat. Send a message. Don't just friend me without saying why you're friending me. Send me a quick message. Say, hey, Tim, I heard you on the radio or the podcast, and we'd love to chat with you about CF because, the CF community has always been fairly disconnected. The reason is we're together, but we're disconnected because cystic fibrosis patients are not allowed to be within 6 feet of each other. If anybody wants to see a Hollywood version of it, watch the movie 5 Feet Apart. I think it's on Netflix. And that is a blatant, fairly true story of what cystic fibrosis is like. So CFers are not allowed to go hang out. We can't go to summer camp together. We can't even have a relationship with another cystic because the short story is that one cystic can get another cystic really sick if they have a specific nasty bacteria in their lungs. So I have CF friends that I can never share a handshake with or a hug or anything. We have to keep our distance. And that's probably the biggest heartbreak growing up with CF is that I could never be close to my other CF friends. But we do what we do to survive.
Thanks again, Tim. I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this has been Outside My Window.